Right now, a storm system is moving across the United States carrying three different kinds of dangerous weather at the same time. One storm, snow to the north, ice in the middle, tornadoes to the south, all happening at once, and forecasters are watching it with the kind of close attention they give to systems that affect millions of people. If you live in the northeast or along the east coast, this storm has not reached you yet, but it is heading your way. If you have family in the Midwest, they are already dealing with it. If you are planning to travel this weekend anywhere along the northeastern coast, you need to know what meteorologists at NOAA and AccuWeather are saying right now, because the next 48 hours are going to determine whether this system brings significant snow to the East Coast this weekend. In the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly what this storm is doing, why it is so unusual for February, where it is headed, and what you need to know before this weekend. We're going to talk about the tornado that touched down in the Midwest yesterday, in February, when tornadoes are not supposed to happen. And we're going to cover the ice that is making roads invisible across the Great Lakes. And then we're going to look at what forecasters are saying about this weekend, when this same system could intensify off the Atlantic coast and turn into a nor'easter aimed directly at Boston, New York and Philadelphia. This is already happening. People in Indiana saw a tornado yesterday. People in Michigan are digging out from heavy snow right now, and the storm is still moving. So here is the question that meteorologists are asking, and it is the question we're going to answer together in this video. Why is one storm doing three completely different things at the same time? And what does that tell us about the weather pattern we are living in right now? Most winter storms pick a lane. They either bring snow, or they bring rain, or they bring severe weather. They do not usually do all three at once. But this system is different. It started quietly over the Great Plains earlier this week, just a low-pressure area that forecasters were tracking but not overly concerned about. Then it began pulling in warm air from the south and cold air from the north, and those two air masses collided in a way that turned a routine February storm into something far more complicated. By the time it reached the central United States, it was producing heavy snow and dangerous travel conditions in one state, freezing rain in the next state over, and tornado warnings 2 states south of that. It is rare to see that kind of variety in a single weather system, especially this late in the winter season, when most storms are straightforward snow events or rain events, not multi-hazard systems that require completely different responses depending on where you live, and the storm is not finished. Right now it is moving east, and every hour that passes it is getting closer to the most populated part of the country. The question is not whether it will reach the East Coast. The question is what it will look like when it gets there. Forecasters at AccuWeather have been tracking this system closely, and they are saying that if the storm stays on its current path, and if it picks up energy from the Atlantic Ocean the way some models suggest it will, then cities like Boston and New York could be looking at significant snow accumulations this weekend. But the models are not all in agreement yet, and that uncertainty is part of the story. When models disagree about a storm's track this significantly, it usually means the final outcome depends on small timing and positioning details that only become clear as the storm approaches the coast. Before we go further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from and what the weather looks like outside your window today. Are you already dealing with this storm, or are you watching it approach? Hit like if this is helping you understand what is coming. And subscribe. We are following this storm through the weekend and will update as the forecast changes. Let us start with the part that caught forecasters off guard, because once you understand why this storm is producing tornadoes in February, the snow and the nor'easter threat start to make a lot more sense. To understand what is happening right now, picture the United States as a meeting point for two very different kinds of air. In the south, you have warm, moist air streaming up from the Gulf of Mexico, the kind of air that feels humid and heavy even in the middle of winter. In the north, you have cold, dry air spilling down from Canada, the kind of air that makes your breath visible and turns rain into snow the moment it hits the ground. Most of the time, these two air masses stay in their own lanes. Warm air dominates the southern states, cold air dominates the northern states, and the line between them shifts gradually as the seasons change. But every now and then, something happens that brings those two air masses into direct contact. That is what is happening right now. This storm system started as a low-pressure area over the Great Plains, a region where cold air and warm air meet more often than anywhere else in the country. At first, it looked like a typical winter storm, the kind that would bring some snow to the Dakotas and Nebraska, and then move on without causing much trouble. But as it began moving east, it started pulling in more and more warm air from the south, and that warm air gave it energy. At the same time, cold air was plunging down from the north. and when those two air masses collided inside the same storm system, the result was something far more complex than a simple snowstorm. By the time this system reached the central United States, it was doing three completely different things at once. In the northern half of the storm, where the cold air was dominant, heavy snow was falling across parts of the upper Midwest. In the southern half of the storm, where the warm air was dominant, thunderstorms were developing, and some of those thunderstorms were strong enough to produce tornadoes. And right in the middle, where the cold air and warm air were meeting directly, freezing rain was falling, coating everything it touched with a layer of ice that made roads and power lines dangerously unstable. This is what meteorologists call a multi-hazard storm, and it is not something you see every day. Most winter storms are either snow events or ice events or severe weather events, but they are rarely all three at the same time. The reason this storm is doing all three is because of the way it is positioned between those two air masses. It is sitting right on the boundary, and that boundary is not a straight line. It is a shifting, unstable zone where the weather can change dramatically from one county to the next. Think about it this way. If you were standing in northern Indiana yesterday, you might have been watching a tornado approach your town, a spinning column of air that looked more like something out of a spring storm than a February weather event. But if you drove 2 hours north into Michigan, you would have been in the middle of a snowstorm, Sayers with visibility dropping to near zero and roads turning into ice rinks. Same storm, same day, completely different threats. That contrast is what makes this system so difficult to forecast and so dangerous for people who are trying to make decisions about whether to travel or whether to stay home. Because the difference between getting snow and getting a tornado is not a matter of hundreds of miles. It is a matter of where you happen to be relative to that invisible boundary between warm air and cold air, and that boundary is moving. Right now, the storm is moving east, and as it moves, that boundary is moving with it. The cold air is following behind the storm, and the warm air is being pushed ahead of it, and that means the weather conditions in any given location are going to change as the storm passes through. A city that is seeing rain right now might see freezing rain an hour from now, and snow an hour after that. A city that is seeing severe thunderstorms right now might see clear skies by tonight, but then wake up tomorrow to find that the cold air has arrived and temperatures have dropped by 20 or 30 degrees. This is the kind of storm where the forecast is not as simple as saying it is going to snow or it is going to rain. The forecast has to account for timing, for temperature changes, for wind direction, for how fast the storm is moving and how much moisture it is carrying. And all of those factors are interacting with each other in ways that even the most sophisticated computer models cannot always predict accurately. NOAA forecasters have been issuing updates on this storm every few hours, and each update has added new details as the storm's behavior becomes clearer. What started as a winter weather advisory for parts of the plains has now expanded into a patchwork of warnings and watches covering more than a dozen states. Some areas are under winter storm warnings, meaning heavy snow is expected and travel will be dangerous. Other areas are under ice storm warnings, meaning freezing rain is expected and power outages are likely. And still other areas are under tornado watches, meaning conditions are favourable for tornadoes to form and people need to be ready to take shelter if a warning is issued. It is rare to see all three of those alert types active at the same time for the same weather system, but that is exactly what has been happening with this storm, and it is a sign of just how unusual this system is, not just in terms of what it is doing, but in terms of when it is doing it. February is supposed to be the tail end of winter, a time when severe weather starts to become more common in the southern states, but snow and ice are still the main threats in the northern states. But this storm is blurring those seasonal boundaries. It is bringing severe weather to places that are used to winter weather, and it is bringing winter weather to places that were expecting an early taste of spring. And that mismatch between what people are expecting and what is actually happening is part of what makes this storm so disruptive. People in the Midwest know how to deal with snow. They have plows and salt trucks and winter tires and all the infrastructure that makes it possible to keep moving even when the weather turns bad. But when a tornado shows up in the middle of winter, that is a different kind of threat, one that requires a different kind of response. You cannot plow your way out of a tornado. You have to take shelter, and you have to do it quickly. And most people are not thinking about tornadoes in February because tornadoes are not supposed to happen in February. But they did happen. At least one confirmed tornado touched down near Bloomington, Indiana, on February 19th, and there were multiple reports of tornado damage in communities across the Midwest. We're going to talk more about that in a moment, because the tornado threat is one of the most surprising parts of this storm, and one of the reasons meteorologists are paying such close attention to it. But before we get there, we need to understand the ice. Freezing rain is one of the most dangerous types of winter weather, and it is often underestimated because it does not look as dramatic as snow or as violent as a tornado. But ice can bring down trees, collapse power lines, and make every surface, roads, sidewalks, driveways, parking lots, completely impassable. When freezing rain falls, it hits the ground as liquid water, but the ground is cold enough that the water freezes on contact, creating a thin, invisible layer of ice that is nearly impossible to walk on or drive on safely. Right now, parts of the Midwest are dealing with significant ice accumulation, and that ice is causing problems that will take days to fix. Power lines are sagging under the weight of the ice, and in some areas those lines have snapped, leaving thousands of people without electricity. Trees are bending under the ice, and some of them are breaking, blocking roads and damaging homes, and every road in the affected areas has become a skating rink, which means emergency vehicles cannot respond as quickly as they normally would, and people who need help are finding it harder to get. This is the part of the storm that does not make for dramatic video footage, but it is the part that has the most lasting impact on communities, because once the ice is on the ground, it does not melt quickly, especially if the temperatures stay below freezing, and even after it melts, the damage it has caused, the downed trees, the broken power lines, the cracked branches hanging over homes, all of that has to be repaired, and that takes time. So right now, while some parts of the Midwest are dealing with snow and other parts are recovering from tornado warnings, there is a whole other group of communities that are dealing with ice, and they are going to be dealing with it for a while. And meanwhile, the storm that caused all of this is still moving. It is still moving and still producing dangerous conditions, and it is heading toward the most densely populated region of the country. And that brings us to the next question, the one that people in the Northeast are starting to ask. What is this storm going to look like when it gets here? Seeing a tornado warning in the middle of February is something most people simply do not expect. And that is exactly what happened yesterday in Indiana. Tornadoes are most common in spring and summer, something you worry about in April and May when the warm air is surging north and thunderstorms are exploding across the plains. But yesterday, on February 19th, residents in and around Bloomington, Indiana, watched as a tornado touched down and moved through the area, leaving behind property damage that caught many residents off guard in mid-February. This was a confirmed tornado, verified by the Storm Prediction Center, the branch of NOAA that tracks severe weather across the United States. It was captured on video. It was documented by trained storm spotters, and it was part of a larger outbreak of severe weather that stretched across multiple states, all happening inside the same winter storm system that was bringing snow and ice to areas just a few hours north. If you have lived in the Midwest for any length of time, you know what tornadoes look like, and you know what they sound like, and you know what it feels like to hear that warning siren go off and realize you have only minutes to get to a safe place. But most people do not expect to hear that siren in February, because February tornadoes are rare. They happen, but they are not common, and when they do happen, they are usually weak and short-lived. The tornado that moved through the Bloomington area was confirmed by NWS Indianapolis as a large and extremely dangerous tornado, moving east at approximately 45 miles per hour. Fox weather meteorologists had identified a high-risk corridor stretching from Vincennes to Bloomington before it touched down. So why did this happen? Why is a winter storm producing tornadoes? The answer comes back to that collision between warm air and cold air. Tornadoes form when you have warm, moist air near the surface and cooler, drier air above it. And when those two layers of air start moving at different speeds or in different directions, the atmosphere becomes unstable. If the conditions are right, if there is enough moisture, enough wind shear, enough instability, then thunderstorms can form, and some of those thunderstorms can rotate, and when a rotating thunderstorm gets strong enough, it can produce a tornado. Most of the time, those conditions are not present in February, because the warm air is not usually strong enough or widespread enough to create the kind of instability you need for tornadoes. But this year, the warm air has been unusually strong, especially across the southern United States, where temperatures have been running well above average for most of the month. That warm air has been sitting there, building up energy, and when this storm came along and started pulling that air northward, it created exactly the kind of environment that tornadoes need to form. So you had people in Indiana, a state that is very much part of the Midwest, a state where winter is still supposed to be in full effect in February, watching as thunderstorms rolled in, not snow. And those thunderstorms were not ordinary thunderstorms. They were severe, with heavy rain and lightning and hail, and in at least one case they produced a tornado that touched down in a place where most people were not expecting severe weather in mid-February. That is exactly what happened in communities across Indiana yesterday, and the fact that it happened in February is a big part of why this storm is getting so much attention from meteorologists. Because tornadoes in February are not supposed to be a major threat. They are supposed to be a rare anomaly, something that happens once in a while but not something you plan for or worry about. But when a winter storm starts producing confirmed tornadoes in the Midwest, it is a sign that something unusual is happening with the atmosphere, something that does not fit the normal pattern of how winter weather is supposed to behave. The Storm Prediction Center issued a tornado watch for parts of the Midwest yesterday, which means they were telling people that conditions were favorable for tornadoes to develop. But a watch is not the same as a warning. A watch means be ready. A warning means it is happening right now. Take shelter immediately. And when that warning was issued for Bloomington and the surrounding areas, people had to react, and they had to react fast because tornadoes do not give you much time. Fortunately, most people did react. They got to safe places. They took the warning seriously, and while there was property damage, while there were trees down and roofs torn off and fences ripped apart, official injury reports were still being confirmed at the time of recording. A testament to how well people in that part of the country understand severe weather and how seriously they take it when a warning is issued. But the fact that they had to respond to a tornado warning in February is the part that feels wrong, the part that makes you stop and wonder what is going on with the weather this year. And it is not just one tornado. There were multiple reports of severe weather across the region, multiple tornado warnings issued, multiple communities that had to take shelter and wait for the storms to pass. This was not an isolated event. This was part of a larger pattern, a pattern of unusually active severe weather happening at a time of year when severe weather is supposed to be relatively quiet. Meteorologists have been talking about this for weeks, about how this winter has been unusually warm in the southern United States and unusually active in terms of storm systems. And now we are seeing the consequences of that pattern, because when you have warm air sitting over the south in February, and when a strong storm system comes along and pulls that warm air northward, you end up with exactly the kind of conditions that produced the tornado in Indiana yesterday. But what we can say is that when the atmosphere has this much energy in the middle of winter, when warm air and cold air are meeting with this kind of sharp contrast, the results are going to be unpredictable. And that unpredictability is part of what makes this storm so concerning for forecasters. The fact that this system produced a confirmed tornado in Indiana in February tells them it carries more energy than a typical late winter storm, and that energy is now heading toward the East Coast. Because the tornado was just one piece of this system, the ice was another piece, the snow was another piece, and all of those pieces are still in motion, still evolving, still moving toward areas where millions of people are going to feel the impact in the days ahead. And while tornado warnings were active across the Midwest, something else entirely was happening just a few states north, and that is where we need to turn our attention next. While tornado warnings were being issued in Indiana, people a few hundred miles north were dealing with a completely different kind of emergency. Heavy snow was falling across parts of Michigan and Wisconsin, the kind of snow that comes down fast and does not stop, the kind that turns roads into white tunnels where you cannot see more than a car length ahead of you. This was not just a light snowfall that you could push through with a quick brush of the windshield. This was serious accumulation, the kind that forces schools to close and highways to shut down, and tells people in no uncertain terms that if you do not need to be outside, stay home. The Great Lakes region is no stranger to snow. People who live there know how to deal with winter. They have snowblowers in their garages and bags of salt in their trunks and boots by the door that are ready to go the moment the first flakes start falling. But even for people who are used to snow, even for communities that pride themselves on staying open no matter what the weather does, this storm has been a challenge. Because it is not just the amount of snow that is falling, it is the speed at which it is falling, the wind that is blowing it around, and the ice that is coming down along with it. In some areas, the snow has been falling so fast that road crews simply cannot keep up. They plough a highway, and by the time they reach the end of it, the beginning is already covered again. They salt an intersection, and the salt gets buried under fresh snow before it has time to melt the ice underneath. This is the kind of snow that wears out plough drivers and uses up municipal budgets and leaves people stranded in places they did not expect to get stuck. And it is not just snow. In many areas, the snow has been mixed with sleet and freezing rain, which means the roads are not just slippery, they are coated with a layer of ice that even four-wheel drive cannot handle safely. When you mix ice with snow, You get a surface that is deceptive, a surface that looks like packed snow but behaves like a skating rink. And that is when accidents happen, when cars slide off the road, when trucks jackknife on the highway, when people realize too late that the road they thought was passable is not passable at all. Right now, there are communities across Michigan and Wisconsin that are essentially shut down. Schools have been closed, businesses have sent employees home, public transit has been suspended, and people are being told to stay off the roads unless they have an absolute emergency, because unnecessary trips in these conditions put both drivers and emergency crews at risk, which is why local officials are asking people to stay home unless it is truly urgent. Power outages have been another major problem. When ice accumulates on power lines and tree branches, the weight of that ice can bring the whole thing down. And when power lines come down in the middle of a snowstorm, it is not a simple fix. Utility crews have to go out in dangerous conditions, often in the dark, often in places where the roads are barely passable, to repair lines that are down and restore power to homes that have been without heat for hours. And every hour that those homes go without power is an hour that the temperature inside drops, and in February in the upper Midwest that is a serious problem. There are people right now who are sitting in cold houses wrapped in blankets, waiting for the power to come back on. There are elderly residents who are at risk because they cannot regulate their body temperature the way younger people can, and when the heat goes out in the middle of winter, especially for older adults, it is a situation worth taking seriously. There are families with young children who are trying to keep everyone warm and fed and calm while they wait for utility crews to make their way through the backlog of outages. And this is all happening while the storm is still active, while snow is still falling, while the wind is still blowing, while the conditions are still too dangerous for crews to work safely in some areas. So the power outages are not getting fixed as quickly as people need them to be fixed, and that is adding to the sense of frustration and exhaustion that comes with any major winter storm. But here is the thing that people outside the region might not fully understand. The Great Lakes region has already been hit multiple times this season, and people are tired. They are tired of shoveling. They are tired of dealing with frozen pipes and slippery driveways and cars that will not start because the battery is too cold. And now here comes another storm, another round of heavy snow and ice. Another few days of being stuck inside and hoping the power stays on and wondering when winter is finally going to ease up. And this storm is hitting at a time when a lot of people in the Midwest were starting to think maybe the worst of winter was behind them. February is supposed to be the home stretch, the month when you can start looking forward to March and the gradual thaw that comes with it. But instead, they are getting buried again, and forecasters are not expecting a quick warm-up after the storm passes. The snow is going to keep falling through today, and then the cold air is going to settle in behind the storm, which means even after the snow stops, the temperatures are going to drop, and everything that has melted is going to freeze again. And while all of this is happening in the northern half of the storm, the southern half is experiencing something completely different. The same storm system that is dropping heavy snow across Michigan brought tornadoes to Indiana. The same system that is causing power outages in Wisconsin is bringing record warmth to parts of the southeast. And that contrast, that stark difference between what is happening in one part of the country and what is happening just a few hundred miles away, is part of what makes this storm so unusual and so difficult to wrap your head around, and the storm is not done. While the Midwest is dealing with snow and ice, while communities are digging out and waiting for the power to come back on, the storm is still moving. It is heading east, and it is still carrying moisture and energy as it moves toward the Atlantic coast. And that is where the next chapter of this story is going to unfold, because while the tornadoes and the ice have already happened, the nor'easter threat is still ahead, and that is what millions of people along the East Coast are watching right now. If you live anywhere along the Interstate 95 corridor from Washington to Boston, this weekend is one you need to be paying attention to, because the same storm system that brought tornadoes to the Midwest and snow to the Great Lakes is now moving toward the Atlantic coast, and when it gets there, it has the potential to do something that forecasters are watching for, but cannot fully predict until it gets closer. It could strengthen rapidly and turn into a nor'easter. A nor'easter is not just a winter storm that happens to hit the northeastern United States. It is a specific type of storm that draws its energy from the Atlantic Ocean, and when conditions are right, that energy can turn a moderate snowstorm into a major weather event very quickly. The reason these storms are so hard to predict is because so much depends on where the storm track goes, how much cold air is available, and whether the storm can tap into the warm ocean water off the coast. If all of those factors line up, a storm that looked manageable can become a much bigger event once it feeds off the ocean. Right now, forecasters at NOAA and AccuWeather are watching this storm closely, and they are seeing signs that it could intensify as it moves off the coast. But they are also being careful not to make definitive predictions yet, because the storm has not reached the coast, and until it does, there is still uncertainty about exactly how strong it will become and exactly where the heaviest snow will fall. Alex Sosnowski, a senior meteorologist at AccuWeather, has been tracking this system for days, and his forecasts have been highlighting the potential for significant snow across parts of New England and the mid-Atlantic this weekend. He has been clear that this is not a guaranteed outcome, that the models are still showing some disagreement about the storm's exact path, but he has also been clear that people in the region need to be preparing for the possibility of a major winter storm because the ingredients are there. Here is what makes a nor'easter so disruptive when it does happen. These storms do not just bring snow, they bring strong, sustained wind that blows the snow sideways and creates whiteout conditions and makes it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of you. They bring coastal flooding, because the wind pushes water inland and causes storm surge that can damage property along the shore, and they bring power outages because the combination of heavy wet snow and strong wind is exactly the combination that brings down trees and power lines. So when meteorologists talk about the possibility of a nor'easter, they are not just talking about snow accumulation. They are talking about a storm that has the potential to shut down entire cities, to cancel flights by the hundreds, to close schools and businesses and leave people stuck at home for days. And that is why people in Boston and New York and Philadelphia are paying attention right now, because if this storm tracks the way some models suggest, it could be a significant event. The timing is another factor that is making this storm particularly concerning. This is happening over a weekend, which means a lot of people were planning to travel, planning to visit family, planning to be on the roads or in the air, and if a major snowstorm hits the East Coast this weekend, all of those plans are going to have to change. If the storm tracks close enough to the coast, flights could be cancelled, highways could close, and train service could be suspended across a wide area. For people who live in the region, the decision about whether to prepare comes down to how much you trust the forecast and how much risk you're willing to take. If you wait until the snow starts falling to go to the store and stock up on groceries and batteries and whatever else you might need, stores tend to get busy before major storms, so picking up what you need a day early is a good idea. But if you prepare now, based on a forecast that might change, you might end up with a house full of supplies you did not need because the storm did not hit your area as hard as expected. That is the gamble that comes with nor'easters. They are powerful and disruptive when they happen, but predicting exactly where they will hit hardest is incredibly difficult until the storm is almost on top of you, and by that point, the window for easy preparation has closed. Right now, the forecast models are showing a range of possibilities. Some models have the storm tracking closer to the coast, which would bring heavy snow to cities like Boston and Portland. Other models have the storm tracking farther offshore, which would mean less snow for the cities and more snow for areas inland. And still other models are showing something in between, where the storm brings moderate snow to a wide area but does not bury any one place in particular. This is the kind of forecast uncertainty that drives people crazy, because what you really want to know is whether you should cancel your plans or not, whether you should stock up on food or not, whether you should make sure you have a full tank of gas or not. And the honest answer right now is that nobody knows for certain. The meteorologists know what the possibilities are, they know what the storm is capable of doing, but they do not know yet which of those possibilities is going to play out. What they do know is that this storm has already demonstrated its ability to produce significant weather. It has already brought tornadoes to the Midwest, ice to the Great Lakes, and heavy snow to areas that were not expecting it. And now it is moving into an environment where it has access to warm ocean water, where it has access to moisture, where it has access to all the ingredients it needs to intensify. So the potential is there. The question is whether the storm is going to tap into that potential, or whether it is going to weaken before it gets the chance. The smartest move right now is simple. Keep checking the forecast over the next day or two, because the picture is going to get much clearer as the storm gets closer to the coast. But while the Northeast is watching the sky and waiting to see what this storm does next, there is another part of the country that is dealing with a completely different kind of weather, and understanding what is happening there is key to understanding why this storm is behaving the way it is. Because while the north is buried in snow and the coast is bracing for a nor'easter, the south is experiencing something that feels more like spring than winter. And that contrast is not just a coincidence. It is part of the same story, part of the same weather pattern that is driving everything else, and that is where we need to look next. While snow is piling up in Michigan, and forecasters in Boston are preparing for a possible nor'easter, people in Georgia and the Carolinas are stepping outside in short sleeves. Temperatures across the southeast have been running well above average for most of February, and in some areas, records are being broken. This is not the kind of record breaking that makes headlines in the same way a major snowstorm does, but it is every bit as unusual, and it is directly connected to everything else that is happening with this storm. The reason the southeast is so warm right now is because warm air from the Gulf of Mexico has been surging northward, pushed by weather patterns that are favouring southerly winds instead of the cold, northerly winds that usually dominate this time of year. And that warm air is not just sitting over the south, it is moving, being pulled northward by the same low-pressure system that is causing the winter storm in the Midwest. And when that warm air collides with the cold air that is plunging down from Canada, the result is exactly the kind of violent weather we have been talking about, the tornadoes. The ice, the heavy snow, cut off that warm air and you have a much simpler cold front. But because the warm air is so strong, because it is running so far ahead of the cold air, the contrast between the two is extreme, and extreme contrasts create extreme weather. For people living in the south, the warm weather might feel like a gift, especially if they have been watching the news and seeing what is happening in other parts of the country. It is hard to complain about pleasant temperatures when you know people a few states north are digging out from heavy snow. But the warmth also comes with its own set of problems, and those problems are connected to the same weather pattern that is causing the storm. When you have temperatures this far above average in February, it affects everything from infrastructure to travel planning, and it sets up exactly the kind of warm-cold contrast that produces dangerous weather. But the biggest issue right now is the severe weather itself. The warmth in the south is what allowed those tornadoes to form in the Midwest yesterday. The thunderstorms that produced those tornadoes needed warm, moist air to develop, and that air came from the south. It was pulled northward by the storm, and when it reached Indiana and the surrounding areas, it collided with the cold air that was moving in from the opposite direction, and that collision created the instability that tornadoes need to form. So even though the tornadoes touched down in the Midwest, the weather conditions that made them possible started in the south. And that is why meteorologists pay so much attention to temperature patterns across the entire country, not just in the areas where the active weather is happening, because what is happening in one region can directly affect what happens in another region hundreds of miles away. Right now, the south is still warm, and that warm air is still feeding the storm system as it moves east. Whether the storm holds on to that warm air supply or loses it to the advancing cold will be the key factor forecasters are watching as it moves toward the coast this weekend. When the cold air does arrive, and forecasters expect it will push south in the coming days, temperatures across the southeast are expected to drop noticeably, and that shift is worth preparing for. This is part of what makes winter weather so unpredictable in a year like this. You can have warmth and cold and everything in between all within the same week, sometimes within the same day, and that variability makes it hard to know what to prepare for, hard to know what clothes to have ready, hard to know whether you need to worry about your pipes freezing or your travel plans getting disrupted by a storm that did not exist 2 days ago. For people who live in the south, the advice right now is to keep an eye on the forecast and be ready for the temperature to change. But beyond the immediate temperature concerns, there is a bigger question that this warm weather raises, and it is the same question we touched on earlier when we talked about the tornado in Indiana. Is this kind of weather pattern, this extreme contrast between warm air in the south and cold air in the north, becoming more common? Are we going to see more storms like this, storms that produce multiple types of dangerous weather at the same time because the temperature gradient across the country is so sharp? The honest answer is that meteorologists are not sure yet. Weather patterns vary from year to year, and what is happening this February does not necessarily mean the same thing will happen next February. But some weather researchers are noting that sharp temperature swings like this one may be happening more often, that the atmosphere is producing more intense weather events, in part because of the sharp temperature contrasts we have been seeing. What does that mean in practical terms? It means storms like this one. Storms that can produce tornadoes, heavy snow and ice all at the same time, might not be as rare in the future as they have been in the past. It means the line between winter weather and spring weather might become more blurred, more unpredictable, harder to forecast. Before we talk about the forecast for the next few days and what you should be watching for, we need to step back and ask a bigger question. Because everything we have been talking about, the tornadoes, the ice, the snow, the warmth, the nor'easter threat, all of it is part of a larger pattern. And that pattern is telling us something about the winter we are living through right now. So what is that pattern? What does it mean? And is this storm just a one-time event, or is it a sign of something bigger that we need to be paying attention to? That is what we need to explore next. This winter has been unusually active, and this storm is part of a weather pattern that meteorologists have been watching for several weeks. And when you step back and look at the entire winter season so far, what you see is a picture of a climate system that is behaving differently than it used to, a system that is producing weather that does not fit neatly into the categories we have relied on for decades. Think about what has happened just in the past few weeks. We have seen record warmth across parts of the south, warmth that has persisted for days at a time and pushed temperatures into ranges that are more typical of April than February. We have seen cold snaps in areas that do not usually get them, sudden drops in temperature that have caused problems for agriculture and infrastructure. We have seen ice storms, snowstorms, severe weather outbreaks, and now this multi-hazard storm that is doing 3 different things at once. That level of variability is unusual. Most winters have a dominant pattern. Either it is a cold winter or a warm winter, either it is a snowy winter or a dry winter. But this winter has been all of those things at the same time, depending on where you are and when you are looking. And that lack of consistency is making it harder for people to know how to prepare, harder for communities to allocate resources, harder for forecasters to provide guidance that applies to more than just the next few days. Meteorologists who have been tracking weather for decades are noticing this shift. They are seeing storms that intensify faster than the models predict. They are seeing temperature swings that are larger than historical averages. They are seeing weather patterns that used to be rare becoming more common. And while they are careful not to attribute any single storm to a specific cause, they are also clear that the overall trend is toward a more energetic, more volatile atmosphere. What does that mean for the average person who just wants to know whether to bring an umbrella or a snow shovel? It means the old rules do not always apply anymore. It means you cannot necessarily look at what happened last February and assume this February will be similar. It means forecasts are going to have more uncertainty built into them, because the atmosphere is capable of surprising even the best computer models. And it means storms like this one, storms that produce multiple hazards across multiple regions at the same time, might become more common. Not every storm is going to be like this. Not every winter is going to be as chaotic as this one has been. But the baseline has shifted. The range of possible outcomes has expanded, and that expansion means we all need to be more prepared, more flexible, more willing to adjust our plans when the weather does something unexpected. So is this the new normal? That is the question everyone wants answered, and the frustrating reality is that nobody can give you a definitive answer. Weather is complex, climate is complex, and while we can see trends and patterns over time, we cannot predict with certainty what any individual winter is going to look like years from now. But what we can say is that some meteorologists are seeing signs that winters with this kind of variability may not be as rare going forward. We can say that storms that produce multiple types of dangerous weather at the same time are something forecasters are paying closer attention to across all seasons. And we can say that preparing for more variability, for more intense weather events, for more surprises, is a smart strategy no matter where you live or what kind of weather you're used to. And that brings us to the most immediate question, the one that matters most to the millions of people who are in this storm's path right now, or who will be in its path in the next few days. What happens next? Where is this storm going? What is it going to do when it gets there? And what do you need to be prepared for if you live anywhere along the eastern seaboard? That is what we need to talk about now, because the storm is still moving. And the most closely watched part of this storm, what it does when it reaches the Atlantic coast, is still ahead. Whether this weekend is routine or becomes one of the more disruptive late winter storms in recent memory. Right now, the storm is still over the Midwest, still producing snow and ice, still causing problems for communities that are trying to dig out and get back to normal. But it is moving, and it is moving toward the Atlantic, and what happens when it gets there is going to depend on factors that forecasters are watching closely, but cannot fully control or predict. Here is what we know. The storm is expected to reach the East Coast by this weekend. As it moves off the coast, it is going to encounter warmer water, and that warm water is fuel. If the storm can tap into that fuel, if the atmospheric conditions are right, it could intensify rapidly and become a significant nor'easter. But if the storm tracks too far north or too far south, if the cold air does not line up properly, if the timing is off by even a few hours, the outcome could be completely different. The difference between a major snowstorm and a moderate one, between a weekend that shuts down cities and a weekend that is merely inconvenient, often comes down to details that are impossible to pin down until the storm is almost upon you. For people living in Boston, the forecast right now is showing the potential for significant snow. How much snow depends on the storm track, but if the storm does what some models are suggesting it might do, accumulations could be substantial. The kind of snow that makes travel difficult and causes power outages and forces people to cancel plans and stay home. The same is true for other cities across New England, places like Portland and Providence and Worcester, places that are used to winter weather but that are also aware of how disruptive a major storm can be. For people living in New York City, the forecast is less certain. The city sits right on the boundary between areas that could see heavy snow and areas that could see mostly rain, and which side of that boundary New York ends up on is going to depend on the exact track of the storm. If the storm tracks just a little bit to the west, New York gets rain. If it tracks just a little bit to the east, New York gets snow. And if it tracks right down the middle, New York gets a mix. Which is often the worst outcome because it creates icy conditions that are harder to deal with than either rain or snow on their own. Philadelphia and Washington are in a similar situation. They are far enough south that they might escape the worst of the snow, but they are close enough to the storm track that they could still see significant impacts depending on how things develop. And even if those cities do not get buried in snow, they are likely to see rain, wind, and coastal flooding, all of which can cause problems for travel and infrastructure. So what should you be doing right now if you live anywhere in this region? First, monitor the forecast. Do not just check it once and assume it is going to stay the same. Check it multiple times a day, because the forecast is going to change as meteorologists get more data and as the storm gets closer. Pay attention to the warnings and watches that are being issued and take them seriously. If a winter storm warning is issued for your area, that means conditions are expected to be dangerous, and you should be prepared to stay home if possible. Second, make sure you have what you need at home. Food that does not require cooking, batteries, medications, and a way to stay warm if the heat goes out. Third, think about your travel plans. If you are planning to drive anywhere this weekend, consider whether that trip is essential. If it is not, consider postponing it until the storm has passed and the roads have been cleared. If it is essential, make sure your car is ready. Full tank of gas, ice scraper, blanket and extra clothes in case you get stuck, phone charger, and check the road conditions before you leave. Do not assume that just because the highway was clear an hour ago, it is still clear now. Conditions can change quickly in winter weather, and getting stuck in winter weather on the highway is a situation that is easy to avoid with a little advance planning. Fourth, check on the people around you. If you have elderly neighbours, if you have friends or family members who live alone, if you know anyone who might have a hard time dealing with a major storm on their own, reach out to them. Make sure they know what is coming. Make sure they have what they need. Offer to help them prepare if they need it. Winter storms can be isolating, and for people who are already isolated, that isolation can become dangerous very quickly if something goes wrong. For people living in the Midwest, the immediate danger is past, but the recovery is just beginning. Roads need to be cleared, power needs to be restored, damage from the ice and the tornadoes needs to be assessed and repaired, and all of that is happening while the cold air that followed the storm is settling in, making everything harder and slower. If you live in one of the areas that was hit hard by this storm, be patient. Recovery takes time, and it takes longer when the weather is not cooperating. For people living in the south, the warm weather is going to end soon. The cold air that is currently over the Midwest is expected to push south in the coming days, and when it arrives, temperatures are going to drop significantly. Make sure your pipes are protected if you have any that are vulnerable to freezing, and be ready for the temperature change because after days of unusually warm temperatures, the cold is going to feel more intense than it would otherwise. The next 48 hours are going to be critical, not just for the people who are directly in the storm's path, but for everyone who is connected to those people, everyone who relies on the transportation networks and supply chains and infrastructure that this storm is disrupting. And while meteorologists can tell you what is possible, while they can give you probabilities and ranges and best guesses, they cannot tell you with absolute certainty what is going to happen until it happens. Weather is unpredictable by nature, and the best we can do is prepare for a range of outcomes and then adapt as the situation unfolds. This storm has already shown what it can do. Now it is heading for the most populated part of the country. The forecast will sharpen over the next day or two. Stay close to updates from NWS and AccuWeather, and check back here as conditions develop. If someone you know is in the storm's path this weekend, Share this video with them now. Drop a comment below with your location. I want to know who is already in it and who is still waiting. Stay safe out there.